Arnold Schwarzenegger locked his right hand around the fist of a man who outweighed him by 60 pounds, and the table between them groaned under the combined pressure of 450 pounds of muscle bearing down on a single point. The big man across from him, a professional arm wrestling champion named Rick Zuffalato, grinned wide because he believed this was already over. What happened in the next 45 seconds would become Gold's Gym legend, a story whispered about for decades, repeated in locker rooms and bodybuilding expos and dusty Venice beach bars, until the details got so wild that people stopped believing it was real. But I promise you, every word of what I'm about to tell you actually went down. Let me set this up fast, because the context matters. It's 1971. Arnold is 24 years old. He's already won 3 Mr. Olympia titles. He's 6'2", 235 pounds of carved granite, and he's standing in the middle of Gold's Gym on Pacific Avenue in Venice Beach, California. The original Gold's, not the franchise you see in strip malls today. This was a concrete bunker with no air conditioning, iron plates that hadn't been cleaned since Kennedy was president, and a smell that could strip paint off a Chevy. This was church for people who moved heavy things. Rick Zuffalato walked in that afternoon without an appointment. He was 6 feet tall, 310 pounds, with forearms that looked like someone had stuffed 2 footballs under his skin. He was the reigning Pacific Coast arm wrestling champion. He'd driven down from Sacramento specifically to find Arnold, not to train, not to shake his hand, to challenge him. Get this. The man drove 400 miles to pick a fight with a bodybuilder over a table. Now, you need to understand something about the culture of strength sports in the early 70s. There was a war going on, not the one in Southeast Asia, a different war. Arm wrestlers thought bodybuilders were all show. They called them chrome muscles, pretty to look at, useless in a fight. Bodybuilders thought arm wrestlers were bar trick guys, carnival acts, one-dimensional. The beef between these two worlds was real, and Rick Zuffalato had made it his personal mission to humiliate bodybuilders whenever possible. He'd already beaten 2 Mr. Universe competitors earlier that year, pinned them both in under 10 seconds. He told a reporter from Strength and Health magazine afterward, direct quote, "Bodybuilders build muscles for mirrors. I build muscles for war." That's his core belief, decoration versus destruction. And he was coming to Venice Beach to prove it on the biggest bodybuilder on the planet. Arnold was in the middle of a set of barbell curls when Zuffalato pushed through the front door. The gym had maybe 15 guys in it. Franco Columbu was there, Dave Draper was there, a couple of guys whose names history didn't bother keeping. Arnold racked the barbell, looked at the newcomer, and wiped his palms on his shorts. He didn't say hello. He said, "You're big." Zuffalato dropped a gym bag on the floor. "I'm here to arm wrestle you." Arnold picked up his water bottle, took a long drink, set it down on a bench with deliberate slowness. "Who told you I arm wrestle?" "Nobody." "That's the point." Arnold turned to Franco. Franco was 5'5", 185 pounds of Sardinian dynamite, and he was already shaking his head. Franco knew what was about to happen. He'd seen Arnold accept challenges before. The man could not say no. It was a flaw and a superpower wrapped in the same impulse. Here's what nobody tells you. Arnold was actually a decent arm wrestler. Not professional level, but decent. He had 22-inch arms at the time, the biggest in the sport of bodybuilding. But arm wrestling isn't about bicep size. It's about wrist strength, leverage, hand position, and a specific kind of tendon density that you can't build with curls. Zuffalato had all of that. Arnold had raw power and something else, something that didn't show up on a measuring tape. Stubbornness, the kind that bends steel. "Set up a table," Arnold said. Dave Draper dragged a heavy wooden utility table to the center of the gym floor. It was the table they used for filling out membership forms. It had coffee rings on it and a gouge in the corner from where someone had dropped a dumbbell. This was not a regulation arm wrestling surface. This was a piece of furniture that was about to become an altar. Zuffalato rolled up his right sleeve. His forearm was grotesque in the best possible way. Veins ran across it in patterns that looked like a roadmap of a city that only understood violence. He planted his elbow on the table and opened his hand, waiting. Arnold sat down across from him. He didn't roll up his sleeve. He was wearing a tank top. Everything was already visible. He planted his elbow and you could see the difference immediately. Arnold's arm was more defined, more sculpted, the kind of arm that ended up on magazine covers. Zufalato's arm was thicker, denser, built for a single brutal purpose. Two philosophies of strength separated by 4 inches of table. They gripped, their hands locked. Franco stepped in to referee because somebody had to, and he put his hand on top of theirs. "Ready?" Franco said. Both men nodded. Franco pulled his hand away. And the world's smallest war began. Believe me when I tell you that the first 5 seconds were the most violent 5 seconds that table had ever experienced. Both men fired everything they had simultaneously. Arnold drove right. Zufalato drove right. Neither arm moved. The table slid 2 inches across the concrete floor from the combined force. Dave Draper put his foot on the table leg to keep it still. Here's where it gets interesting. At the 6-second mark, Zufalato did something that Arnold did not expect. He didn't try to pin Arnold's arm down. Instead, he rolled his wrist inward, a technique called a top roll, which changes the leverage point from your bicep to your hand and fingers. It's a professional move. It's what separates arm wrestlers from strong guys. And it worked. Arnold's hands started rotating. His knuckles began turning toward the ceiling, which meant his wrist was being compromised, which meant the leverage was shifting, which meant he was about to lose. Arnold's jaw tightened so hard you could see the muscles in his temples jump. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He stopped trying to win and started refusing to lose. There's a difference. Winning is offensive. Not losing is defensive. Arnold went into a defensive position, his arm at about 45 degrees, holding, burning every fiber in his forearm and bicep just to stay alive. 12 seconds in, Zufalato was leaning into it now. His face had gone red. He was applying constant pressure, the kind of pressure that wears you down the way water wears down rock. Patient, relentless. He had Arnold at a disadvantage and he knew it. He looked up from their locked hands and made eye contact with Arnold and said, "Mirrors." That was it. One word. And he said it with a grin. "I swear this happened." Arnold heard that word, and something behind his eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It was colder than anger. It was the look of a man who just decided that whatever this cost him, whatever tendon he had to tear, whatever bone he had to stress, he was not going to give this man the satisfaction. Arnold stopped defending. He planted his feet flat on the concrete. He squared his shoulders. And he drove, not with his arm, with his entire body. He channeled everything through his shoulder, through his chest, through the thick slab of his back, and he pushed it all into his arm. This is terrible arm wrestling technique. Any coach would tell you that. But Arnold wasn't arm wrestling anymore. He was doing something else entirely. He was making a point. Their arms came back to center. 12 o'clock. Dead even. Zufalato's grin disappeared. For the first time, the professional arm wrestler looked surprised. He recalibrated. He tried the top roll again. Arnold absorbed it. He took the wrist rotation and held it and didn't let it turn him. His forearm was shaking. You could see the tremor running from his elbow to his fingertips. 20 seconds now. The gym was dead silent. Nobody was lifting. Nobody was talking. Every single person in that room was standing around that coffee-stained table, watching two men try to break each other's will through their right hands. 25 seconds. Arnold started to move Zufalato's arm, not fast, inch by inch, the way you'd bend something that wasn't designed to bend. Zufalato leaned harder. He brought his left hand up and grabbed the edge of the table for stability, which is legal in most arm wrestling formats. He dug in. He wasn't going easy. But here's the thing. No, here's the real thing. Arnold had something that Zufalato had never encountered in all his years of arm wrestling. Cardiovascular endurance. Bodybuilders in 1971 did not do cardio. It was considered counterproductive. But Arnold did. Arnold rode his bike to the gym every day. Arnold did high-rep sets that left him gasping. Arnold trained with a volume that most bodybuilders thought was insane. And that volume had given him something that pure arm wrestlers didn't have. He could sustain output. While Zufalato's strength came in peaks, Arnold's came in waves. At 30 seconds, Zufalato's arm was at about 2 o'clock, tilted, losing. His face had gone from red to purple. His breathing was ragged. He was putting everything he had into staying alive. And the terrible irony was that he was now in the exact position he'd put Arnold in 15 seconds earlier, defending, refusing to lose, but he didn't have the gas tank to do it. 35 seconds. Arnold's face was a mask. No expression, no grin, no showmanship. Just work, just pressure. Just the slow, grinding, mechanical application of force against a man who was running out of it. 40 seconds. Zuffalato's arm hit the 230 position. Past the point of no return. Once your arm gets past a certain angle, the physics work against you. Your bicep can't generate force in that position. Your shoulder is compromised. You're fighting gravity and your opponent at the same time. Trust me on this. 43 seconds. Arnold pinned Rick Zuffalato's hand to the table so hard that the table jumped. Dave Draper had to catch a glass of water that was sitting on the corner. Franco raised his hand, even though there was nothing formal about this. It was just instinct. When someone wins, you raise their hand. Arnold stood up from the table. He shook his right arm out, flexed his fingers, and rolled his wrist in circles. He was hurting. You could see it. He walked 3 steps away and picked up his water bottle and took another long drink. He didn't celebrate. He didn't shout. He didn't point at Zuffalato or talk trash or flex for the guys watching. Zuffalato sat at the table for a long moment. His right hand was still flat on the wood where Arnold had pinned it. He stared at it. This man had driven 400 miles to prove a point. He'd beaten 2 Mr. Universe winners. He'd told a national magazine that bodybuilders build muscles for mirrors. And now he was sitting in the temple of bodybuilding with his hand pinned to a utility table by the most famous bodybuilder alive. Here's where the story takes a turn that nobody expects. And this is why I'm telling you this story, not the arm wrestling. What happened after? Zuffalato stood up. He walked around the table. He stood in front of Arnold, and he extended his left hand. Not his right. His right was still throbbing. His left. Arnold took it. "How much do you charge for a membership?" Zuffalato said. "I kid you not." The man who drove to Venice Beach to humiliate bodybuilders asked for a membership at a bodybuilding gym, right there, right then. With the sweat still on his face and the defeat still fresh, Arnold looked at him for a beat. Then he looked at Franco. Then he looked back at Zuffalato. "You serious? I've never been beaten in a match that lasted more than 15 seconds. You held me for 40. Whatever you're doing in here, I need to understand it." Arnold pulled a chair out from the table. The same table. "Sit down." And for the next 2 hours, Arnold Schwarzenegger gave Rick Zuffalato a free seminar on bodybuilding training. Not arm wrestling training. Full body training. He explained his split routines. He demonstrated exercises. He talked about volume, about progressive overload, about the connection between mind and muscle that he would later make famous in pumping iron. He treated the man who'd come to embarrass him with complete, genuine respect. Now pay attention to this part because it matters. Franco pulled Arnold aside at one point during this impromptu tutorial. He said, "Arnold, this guy came here to make you look bad." Arnold said, "He came here because he thought he was right. Now he knows he was wrong. That takes guts." That single sentence tells you everything about Arnold Schwarzenegger that his 7 Mr. Olympia titles don't. Most guys who win a public challenge would gloat. They'd tell the story later with themselves as the hero and the other guy as the fool. Arnold didn't do that. He saw a man who had the courage to test his beliefs, and when those beliefs failed, had the even greater courage to abandon them on the spot. And Arnold respected that more than the victory itself. Zuffalato came back to Gold's Gym 3 more times that year. He drove from Sacramento each time. 400 miles down, 400 miles back. He incorporated bodybuilding training into his arm wrestling preparation. Listen to what happened next. He won the National Arm Wrestling Championship in 1972. Not because Arnold taught him to arm wrestle better. Arnold didn't know how to teach that. But because Arnold taught him to train his entire body, not just his arm. He added functional strength. He added endurance. He added the ability to sustain pressure beyond the 15-second window that most arm wrestling matches lived in. And here's the part that breaks my brain. Zuffalato told a reporter after winning the national title, "A bodybuilder taught me how to arm wrestle." He didn't name Arnold. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who trained at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach. Everyone knew who had the 22-inch arms. But Zuffalato was giving credit without making it about celebrity. He was being genuine. He was saying I was wrong, and a man I disrespected made me better. Let me back up for a second because I skipped something important. During the arm wrestling match itself, at about the 20-second mark, when Arnold started his comeback push, something happened that only Franco noticed. Franco told this story years later in an interview that almost nobody saw. He said that when Arnold started driving Zuffolato's arm back toward the table, Arnold's face went completely blank. No strain, no effort, just empty. Franco said he'd seen that face before. He'd seen it during Arnold's posing routines at Mr. Olympia. It was the face Arnold made when he went somewhere else in his head, when the pain stopped being pain and started being fuel. Franco called it the switch. He said Arnold had the ability to flip a switch in his brain that turned suffering into information, not motivation, information. The pain would tell Arnold's body what was working and what wasn't, and his body would adjust in real time, redirecting force, changing angles, compensating for fatigue, all without conscious thought. It was the same mechanism that let Arnold train 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, for years. Normal humans feel pain and stop. Arnold felt pain and processed it. This is not mystical nonsense. Modern sports science calls it pain dissociation. Elite athletes have it. Ultramarathon runners have it. Navy SEALs have it. Arnold had it before anyone had a name for it. And this is what Zuffolato ran into at the 20-second mark. He was arm wrestling a man who could not be discouraged by pain. You can beat that man physically if you're strong enough. Zuffolato was strong enough. But you can't beat him in a war of attrition, because he will hold on longer than you. He will sustain output longer than you. He will keep pushing when your body is screaming at you to stop, because his body is screaming too and he simply doesn't care. Mark my words. That quality is what separated Arnold from every other bodybuilder of his generation. Not his genetics, not his training program, not his supplements. His ability to suffer longer than anyone else in the room. Now the story gets another layer, because the arm wrestling match itself became a marketing tool. Not intentionally. Arnold didn't plan it. But Joe Weider, who was Arnold's sponsor and the publisher of Muscle and Fitness magazine, heard about the match and immediately saw the angle. He ran a 2-page spread in the magazine the following month with the headline, "Arnold defeats arm wrestling champion, proves bodybuilding is real strength." This was 1971. Bodybuilding was still a fringe sport. Most Americans thought bodybuilders were vain narcissists who couldn't actually do anything with their muscles. The arm wrestling match gave wider ammunition to argue otherwise, and Arnold played along because Arnold always understood the value of a good story. He knew that one dramatic moment, properly told, was worth more than 100 competition results. The magazine article got picked up by mainstream newspapers. The Los Angeles Times ran a brief item about it. A radio station in San Francisco did a segment. Suddenly, people who didn't care about bodybuilding were talking about the bodybuilder who beat the arm wrestling champion. It was maybe the first time Arnold broke through to a general audience. 4 years before Pumping Iron, 8 years before his first movie role that anyone remembers. You've got to understand the genius of what happened here, even if it was accidental. Arnold didn't prove he was a better arm wrestler. He wasn't. Zuffolato had better technique, better leverage, better hand strength. Arnold proved he was a better athlete. And that distinction mattered. Because Americans love athletes. Americans don't love bodybuilders, not in 1971. But an athlete who can win outside his sport, that's a story America wants to hear. This is the playbook Arnold would use for the next 50 years. Win in your lane, then prove you can win outside it. Bodybuilding to Hollywood, Hollywood to politics, politics to investing. Every transition was the same formula. Show up in someone else's arena, take the hit, then push back harder than they expected. The arm wrestling match was the prototype. But let me get back to the human part of this, because the business angle is obvious, and the human angle is where the real weight lives. 6 months after the match, Arnold was in Sacramento for a guest posing appearance. He was at the venue early, standing backstage, when a door opened and Zuffolato walked in. The man had a gift in his hand, a small wooden box. Arnold took it, opened it. Inside was a brass belt buckle, custom made, shaped like 2 arms locked in an arm wrestling grip. On the back, Zuffolato had engraved one word. Arnold turned it over and read it, respect. Arnold didn't say anything for a few seconds. He held the buckle in his palm and looked at it. Then he looked at Zuffolato and did something that Franco, who was standing 10 feet away, said he had never seen Arnold do in all their years of friendship. Arnold's eyes got wet, not crying, not tears rolling down his face. Just a gloss, a shine, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. You have to remember who Arnold was at this point in his life. He was 24 years old. He'd left Austria at 21. His father was dead. His mother was an ocean away. He was living in a country where he barely spoke the language, surrounded by competitors, not friends. Franco was his closest ally, but Franco was also his rival. Joe Weider was his benefactor, but Weider was also his boss. Every relationship Arnold had was transactional in some way. Every handshake came with an angle. And here was this man, this 300-pound arm wrestler from Sacramento who'd come to tear Arnold down and ended up building him up, who drove 800 miles round trip to learn from the guy who beat him, who had a belt buckle custom made with one word on it. No angle, no transaction, just respect. Arnold put the buckle in his pocket. He wore it to the posing exhibition that night. He wore it on stage in Sacramento, in front of a crowd that had no idea what it meant. And according to Franco, he wore it to the gym for months afterward. That buckle is in Arnold's private collection today. He mentioned it once, briefly, in a 2003 interview during his gubernatorial campaign. A reporter asked him about the most meaningful gift he'd ever received. Arnold said, "A belt buckle from a man who taught me that losing can be the beginning of something." The reporter had no idea what he was talking about. Arnold didn't explain. Here's where I want to land this story, because there's a lesson in it, and the lesson isn't what you think. The lesson isn't that Arnold was stronger than an arm wrestling champion. He wasn't, not in arm wrestling terms. On any given day, Zuffolato could have beaten him. The outcome of that match was determined by duration, not by peak force. If it had been over in 10 seconds, Zuffolato wins. It went 43 seconds, and Arnold won because he could sustain. The lesson isn't that bodybuilding is superior to arm wrestling. It's not. They're different disciplines with different demands. Arnold knew that. Zuffolato knew that by the end of the day. The real lesson is about what happens after you lose. Zuffolato had two choices when Arnold pinned his hand. He could walk out that door, drive back to Sacramento, and tell himself that the match didn't count. It wasn't regulation. The table was wrong. He wasn't warmed up. There are 1,000 excuses available to a man who just lost, and every single one of them is a door that leads to stagnation. Or he could do what he actually did. Stand up, walk around the table, extend his hand, and ask, "How much do you charge for a membership?" That's the moment. Right there. That's the decisive turning point in this story. Not when Arnold pinned his arm. Not when Arnold started his comeback at the 20-second mark. The turning point was when a 310-pound man looked at his own defeat and decided it was an education. And Arnold recognized it immediately, because Arnold had done the exact same thing. When he lost to Frank Zane in 1968, a man who weighed 60 pounds less than him, Arnold didn't make excuses. He studied Zane's physique. He analyzed where he was weak. He adjusted his training. He came back and won Mr. Olympia the next year and then 6 more times after that. Arnold knew what it looked like when a strong man chose growth over ego because he'd made that choice himself. Two men, different sports, different bodies, same mentality. Now, if you've stayed with me this long, you're my kind of person. This is the kind of story that doesn't get told in the highlight reels. You won't find it in Arnold's autobiography. You won't find it in the bodybuilding documentaries. It lives in the margins, in Franco Columbu's obscure interviews, in old issues of Strength and Health magazine that you can only find in collectors' basements, in the memory of guys who were standing in Gold's Gym on a Tuesday afternoon in 1971 when a 300-pound stranger walked through the door looking for a fight and left looking for a teacher. If this story hit you the way it hit me the first time I heard it, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell. We dig up stories that history tried to bury, and we tell them the way they deserve to be told. That's what we do here. Let me leave you with one more detail because it's the detail that ties the whole thing together. In 1975, Arnold competed in his last Mr. Olympia. He won his 6th consecutive title. After the competition, there was a banquet. Arnold was seated at the head table, hundreds of people in the room, bodybuilders, journalists, sponsors, celebrities. At one point during the evening, Arnold stood up and gave a short speech. He thanked the usual people, Joe Weider, Franco, his training partners, the fans, Then he said something that most people in the room didn't understand. He said, "I also want to thank a man who is not here tonight, who showed me that the strongest thing a person can do is change their mind." Nobody knew who he was talking about. The speech moved on. The banquet continued. The moment passed. Franco knew. He looked across the table at Arnold and gave a small nod. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. The words hung in the room, and then the evening moved forward. But think about what Arnold was really saying. The greatest bodybuilder who ever lived, at the peak of his career, in front of every important person in his industry, took a moment to honor a man who lost an arm wrestling match in a concrete gym on a Tuesday. He honored the loss, not the winning, not the victory he'd earned that night. The loss that someone else had earned 4 years earlier. Because Arnold understood something fundamental. Winning is easy to celebrate. Everybody celebrates winning. But losing with grace? Losing and then growing? Losing and then driving 400 miles to learn from the man who beat you? That is the rarest form of strength there is. And Arnold, who built his entire mythology on winning, on domination, on being the best in the world at everything he touched, chose to honor that. Rick Zuffolato passed away in 2009. He spent his later years coaching young arm wrestlers in Northern California. He never became famous. His name doesn't appear in any of the major bodybuilding histories. He's a footnote in a story that most people don't know exists. But in Arnold's private collection, behind glass, there is a brass belt buckle shaped like 2 arms locked together. And on the back, one word. Arnold leaned over the table that day in 1971, his right hand still trembling from the effort, and said 7 words to the man he'd just defeated. "You'd be good at what I do." That's it. 7 words. No swagger, no condescension. Just one strong man telling another strong man that the strength he had could work in a different direction. That the 310 pounds of force Zuffolato carried through the world didn't have to be limited to 1 table and 1 grip and 1 15-second window. That there was a bigger game, and Zuffolato could play it. And Zuffolato heard him, really heard him. And that hearing changed the entire back half of his career. That's the story of the arm wrestling match at Gold's Gym in 1971. 2 men walked up to a table. One of them lost, and the one who lost might have won the most. That's what legends are actually made of. Not the guy who pins the arm, the guy who gets up afterward and says, "Teach me."